Hi everyone. So this is the third part in our Drupal 8 TDD tutorial where we're gonna write a form. So in the first part I showed you how you can use TDD to write tests for a custom file validation callback. The second part we saw how we can use TDD to test that our form is being built the way we expect it. And in this part we want to see how we can check the form validation method, how we can test that. Before we start, I just want to mention something that there will be cases where it's impractical to use a unit test for the form validation. Sometimes you just need access to entities, you need to have access to the database, and when that happens and you find yourself mocking a lot of code in a unit test, then it means that you might be better off using a kernel test. Kernel tests are really fast as well. They're far slower than unit tests like percentage-wise, but they're still pretty fast to run. And they're way, way faster than using a functional test. And again, the whole goal of this tutorial series is for me to show you that you should not use functional tests unless you really, really have to. Because functional tests are no way to do test-driven development in Drupal 8. So without further ado, let's get back to our form where we left it last time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new field. This field is not going to make any sense, but it's just to demonstrate. So I'm going to create a new field called palindrome. It's palindrome. So as the name suggests, this is going to be a text field that's going to receive a palindrome. So if you don't know what a palindrome is a string of texts that reads the same way backwards. So for example, the first name Anna, if you were to reverse that, it would still read Anna. So that's a very simple example. I have two more complex examples here. So if you discard spaces, punctuation, and would put everything in the same case, so lowercase or uppercase, was it a car or a cat I saw? If you reverse that, you actually get the same string. Same for this line. So these are two more complex examples we want to test, and obviously we'll be adding some more test cases as well. So we have our field, and in true TDD fashion, let's start by writing a test. So I'm going to get back to my book import form test, which is a unit test. And let me add palindrome validation. Let me add a new test method. The way I'm going to do this is that I'm going to, again, instantiate my form. And I'm going to create a custom form state object. And what I will do is that I'm going to call the validate form method directly and pass in the form state. Now, PHP Storm is very helpfully telling me that this doesn't work. The reason is that the validate form method, the first parameter is passed by reference. So we cannot pass just an array like that. We need to pass a variable. In our particular case, we don't need the form itself being built. So I'm just going to add a simple empty array here. But if in your case you would actually need the built form, then you could use something like this. But this will suffice for now. So I want to have different tests run with different strings. So I could put like a for loop or for each loop or something, or just copy paste the same piece of code. But in PHP Unit, what you can do, which is really helpful, is use a data provider. So palindrome data. And the way this works is that I can define a custom method that's going to return an array of arrays. So what PHP Unit is going to do is going through this array, and for every item, for every array in this array, it's going to use this as the arguments for this method. So, for example, if I'm going to use this palindrome, it's going to pass it like this. So it's going to go through this first argument, pass it to my palindrome validation. But I want to use this for both failing and passing tests. So the second parameter I want to pass is whether the validation passes or not. So here, for example, it would pass this string, true as passes. Let me add the other cases that I want to check. Obviously, one case I really want to check is a single letter. A single letter should work. If something is empty, then I want it to pass. I want to try actually several cases. And obviously, I also want a failing test, because otherwise, A, B, C, D, E, we also want to validate that it actually sees an error. So here I have several test cases. Now, how do I plug it into this? Well, pretty easy. I take my form state and we set value. So I know this is the palindrome field, and I'm going to pass it string. And I'm going to check the validate form. And then if it passes, if it's supposed to pass, then I want to assert that the form state get errors array is empty, right? And on the contrary, if it's not supposed to pass, I want to assert that we have exactly one error, not anymore. And I also want to assert that the error array contains the key palindrome. So obviously I could make my code drier if this were a variable, but I'm just going to keep it like this for now. I think it's a bit more readable. So again, if the string, once set, passes through validation, if it validates, we should not have any errors in our form state. And if it doesn't validate, we should have exactly one error, and this error should be for palindrome. So let's run our test. And obviously it fails, which is exactly what we want because we haven't written any logic yet. So now that we have a failing test, it's time to start writing our custom code. So the first thing we want to do is get the value. Now remember, I said that if it's empty, I don't want to validate, so it should pass. So this is where I'm going to put my logic. So this empty is going to take care of these two lines. And now what I want to do is I want to check if palindrome is different from string reverse palindrome. I want to set an error. Palindrome. And we want an error message, which we don't really care about in our case, but this is not a palindrome. So here we go. Now if I run the tests, some are going to pass, but not all of them. And the reason is, here for example, these two don't pass. Why? Because obviously if you keep the punctuation in the spaces, then they're not going to match. So what we need to do is we need to clean this palindrome up. What I'm going to use is I'm going to preg replace palindrome. Oh, what did I do? There. And here I'm going to use a regular expression. And the regular expression is actually pretty simple. We just want to take anything that's not alphanumerical. So here I'm using the negation. I want to replace it by nothing. So that's going to take care of part of the problem, but if I run it again, it's still not going to pass. Why? Because we have uppercase and lowercase. And obviously, PHP doesn't treat an uppercase letter as equal to its lowercase. So let me, well, string to upper, string to lower. It doesn't really matter in our case. We just want to make sure that it uses the same casing. So here I'm going to convert it to string to an uppercase after it's being cleaned up. And now it passes. So this is a pretty simple way to check that your form validation works. And again, this is just using unit tests. And if I compute the coverage, there we go. So I already have it here. If I recompute, you see that we are pretty good in terms of code coverage stats. So this is from last time, and this is what we just added. So I already have a test that checks that this works, this condition. All this we're not testing because we consider it's just a simple configuration. And here, as you can see, test plan and run validation was tested several times. So we know that this will always work. And again, not using any functional test, just unit test, and we are using true TDD. So that's it for today. This is just to show you how you can use TDD for the validation. And the next part, we will see how we can use TDD for the submission part. See you then. Cheers.